Hey, morning, welcome back. If you're new or returning, I'm Zach Markowski. This is Sharper Pen Image Consulting. My focus of the channel is image consulting, but I also get into literary analysis and other things. So today I have both pieces of psychological or scientific writing as well as a poem and some other thoughts to explore the psychological state of what we call primarily the general species man. And by this I mean when in on this channel, especially in these last few episodes, as I've been kind of discussing modern man as he is a being who's been conditioned through marketing and sloganeering, and how Western civilization, especially here in America, has gone from we've gone to an increasingly centralized bureaucracy, um, yet the figure of the overt tyrant has been further and further unnecessary, as there has been a complete diffusion of responsibility amongst infinitely diffuse people in a system where so many people just they don't fit in, they can't make it in the system, they don't really belong, they're not competent to do their jobs, there's not a lot of options or things available for them. So within this, there's been a thorough devaluing and dehumanization of men, because for them to then fit in to be these cogs in the machine. And what it means is that basically, men have to stoop wherever they go. No matter where you go in society, that you're trading off big parts of yourself to fit in for questionable reasons, right? Because people have their own needs and desires. Not everyone wants the same, seeks the same, is the same, right? So the idea that there's some objective standard, even though society as such is defined by that, but in a country like America, where cultures and peoples vary vastly within states, let alone coast to coast. Here in California, there are countless communities, there are countless demographics, there are countless psychographics. The smallest being the individual, the largest being whole cities of the largest population of any other people outside their native home, right? So the way these things vary is immense, and for Americans to pretend like anyone lives under an objective rule when everyone is subject to federal and state rule, yet everyone does their own thing. And like I say, the biggest lesson America teaches generally is, hey, he who cheats the most wins the most, right? Yeah, there's prices if you get caught, but there's lots of ways to game the system that may not be legally wrong, but are, gray area wrong, or what everyone would call gray area wrong. But then you say, who's gray area? Because the leaders set the model of what like cheating and theft and robbing and slaying all looks like. So when that's the name of the game, you go, oh, okay. You see that everything in our society and in our world is divided by class first and foremost, right? And it's as simple as that. And then the thing about class is the way it's bought and sold is that everyone wants it, everyone wants to be it. But the reality of American reality is that class mobility has largely been a myth. Most people just are born, live, and die where they do, just like they have for all of history. Very few people actually move from one class to another. It's rare. People just stay where they're at. And you know, anyway, so the first thing I wanted to get into here, talking about, what do I mean then? What does this look like? Well, someone like a poet like T.S. Eliot, for instance, saw this back in 1925, and he wrote this famous poem called The Hollow Men, right? There's other terms for this, but this is The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. 1. We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Alas, our dried voices when we whisper together are quiet and meaningless, as wind in dry grass, or rats' feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom remember us if not as lost, violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. 2. Eyes I dare not meet in dreams, in death's dream kingdom these do not appear. There the eyes are sunlight on broken column. There is a tree swinging, and voices are in the wind singing, more distant and more solemn than a fading star. Let me be no nearer in death's dream kingdom. Let me also wear such deliberate disguise as rat's coat, crow's skin, cross stabs in a field, behaving as the wind behaves, no nearer. Not that final meeting in the twilight kingdom. 3. This is the dead land. This is cactus land. Here the stone images are raised. Here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. It is like this in death's other kingdom, waking alone at the hour when we are trembling with tenderness, lips that would kiss from prayers to broken stone. 4. The eyes are not here. There are no eyes here in this valley of dying stars, in this hollow valley, this broken jaw of our lost kingdoms. In this last of meeting places, we grope together and avoid speech, gathered on this beach of the tumid river. Sightless, unless the eyes reappear as a perpetual star. Multifoliate rose of death's twilight kingdom, the hope only of empty men. 5. Here we go round the prickly pear, prickly pear, prickly pear. Here we go round the prickly pear at 5 o'clock in the morning. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act falls the shadow, for thine is the kingdom. Between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response falls the shadow. Life is very long. Between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent falls the shadow, for thine is the kingdom. For thine is life, for thine is this is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. So again, Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. And it kind of dovetails into what psychologist Carl Jung talks about in an essay like The Undiscovered Self. And it's not an essay, it's more like I guess, yeah, you maybe would call it an essay or a short book. And in it, he just talks about modern man's position in the world and what all this is beginning to look like. He doesn't call modern man hollow men or last men. He does call them mass men. So again, everything I talked about man and woman become tiny cogs in the machine, being directed primarily by central organization, bureaucracy, less and less overt tyrannical control, more and more subliminal signaling and messaging and propaganda, because people are born and raised into our very propagandistic system. So everything from their childhood to their adulthood has been designed and marketed by someone else. So psychologically speaking, you can see that for a lot of Americans, of course, it's hard for them to understand themselves, understand other selves. And I'd say this for people in general, because what Jung says in this essay is that self-knowledge is actually quite rare, and it usually comes at an extreme cost. So most people actually don't have much of it. And the other idea is that, so if someone can't understand themselves or others, they're definitely not going to understand, like their connection between past, present, and future. They're not going to see those bridges. They're not going to be able to do anything about it, right? So we're talking about, when I said, modern man and woman are more powerless and devalued than they've ever been in human history, this is what I mean. They've been depotentiated as units of the state, which Carl Jung explains here. So basically, he's talking about the modern situation. This was in the Cold War era. I want to say late 50s or maybe early 60s, but not that anyone alive really recalls, any of the younger people at least, that at the time, it was just post-World War II, the world had seen things it had never seen before, and was questioning then, if we can do this now, then what comes next, right? Everyone's afraid of what comes next. And there was a stalemate between Russia and the US over basically what was thought of as mutually assured self-destruction should someone decide to fire a nuclear weapon, right? Because that's basically World War II culminated. World War II was the ultimate arms race for present man, in the sense that he developed his most powerful weapon, and that's what it culminated with. And that's basically, that arms race both started and stopped that war, and it's going to be the same arms race that starts and stops the next war. It's the same arms race. I don't have the 1984 novel, graphic novel there anymore for the moment, but I want you to know that Big Brother's still watching. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So the threat has always been real, and this is Jung addressing it much earlier in our present era. So this chapter 1, the plight of the individual in modern society. What will the future bring? From time immemorial, this question has occupied men's minds, though not always to the same degree. Historically, it is chiefly in times of physical, political, economic, and spiritual distress that men's eyes turn with anxious hope to the future, and when anticipations, utopias, and apocalyptic visions multiply. Right. Remember, it seems like I was joking to a friend the other day, actually, we were kind of talking about this. I remember when I was a kid hearing, Will Smith getting jiggy with it, and he did that Clash cover, right? And it's like one moment he's like, oh, it's the new millennium, hold up, the new millennium. And then it was like Y2K, and then 2001, right, 9/11 in America. And then it really ramped up our 24/7 news cycle of selling like desperation and fear. And then it's moved into our online space, because the online space was actually quite quaint. Once upon a time, it was like a bunch of GeoCities websites. And yes, you can find that on the internet still, but everything's gratuitous. There's a lot of bot work. There's a lot of crap work. There's a lot of hack work. There's so much in your face. There's so much that's ugly and vulgar. There's so much that's base and simple, because that's how our society is. So, of course, our media would reflect it. Yes, I said I'm loath to call Americans stupid or dumb or insult them, but what I do think is true, that our society promotes, creates, produces, well, then promotes so much, so kind of under the rug, kind of invisible. But we have a lot of creeps and weirdos here, guys. Not just crazy people, not just hoarders, not just, and I'm not trying to insult anyone. It's just, I mean, the people here are sick, is what I'm saying. A lot of them are. Not just the obesity epidemic, not just the suicide epidemic, not just the drug epidemics, not just, right, that there's a reason why it's come to be this way. Right, depotentiated. So he's going on here. One thinks, for instance, of the chiliastic expectations of the Augustan age at the beginning of the Christian era. Ah, yes, thought no American ever. Or the changes in the millennium. Hold up, millennium. Today, as the end of the second millennium draws near, millennium, we are again living in the age filled with apocalyptic images of universal destruction. What is the significance of the split symbolized by the Iron Curtain? Hold on. Fucking Will Smith, Jesus Christ. The Iron Curtain, which divides humanity into two halves. What will become of our civilization and of man himself if the hydrogen bomb begins to go off, or if the spiritual and moral darkness of state absolutism should spread over Europe? Again, or again, or again. And it's like, they kind of figured out, hey, people react poorly to an individual, so we can actually make the individual the enemy and the scapegoat, like society always has. It's just kind of another, like the witch burning just turns in its sophistication, really, like it's a circle. So they just, because there's this introduction in which, he sets the stage for why it's like this, because in an atmosphere of fear and mistrust and hatred and people working off their instincts, no matter what anyone might judge good or bad therein, is that even in the most, what he basically says in this essay is, even in the most pathological impulses or childlike fantasies, is that there exists a kernel of healthy instinct trying to express itself, of which is related to adaptedness, not just in humanity, but in animals, period, right? That all animals carry certain internal images of both themselves, the world in which they live and interact, the potential that might happen, and they have some notion of a total situation. Even if you look to a moth or a frog or a lizard and you say, yes, that lizard can't like read me a treatise on morality, let's say, but it sure can regrow its tail and it sure can procreate. Or even a sea sponge. A sea sponge doesn't have a brain, yet it's a living organism that survives just fine. Human beings are no different, right? So the idea that you can depotentiate them, rob them of all will and volition and vision, yet still use them and still have them live a long time and survive a long time as depotentiated units that you can use like fossil fuels. That's what Jung is describing here, the plight of the individual in a depotentiated, atomized society. So with this present psychic climate, with the fear and the paranoia in the air, with the goodwill burned up, with so many subversive elements, that's what he kind of gets into here, is that society takes for granted that there is a middle stratum that can carry the burden of, you could say, both those who drain the most from the bottom and the top of any civilization or society. By that I mean those who steal, those who take more than they give, right? That we have far more people in our country, in our world, who rapaciously take and have been taught to take more than they ever give. I know it varies culture to culture. I know not everyone's like us, and that's good, right? And that's fine. And that these things vary, but given when certain cultural, climate, and evolutionary arms race conditions are applied, people behave in very particular way, because all these instincts and pathologies, the healthy instincts, the abnormal pathologies, all of these are wrapped up in our total vision, in our total understanding. Again, you can call people stupid all you want, yet that people don't even need to be conscious of anything, that they don't need to think that hard to survive in this world. And it's kind of always been this way, that we could believe in mythologies and fantasies and so many other things. We could believe in UFO cults, yet still survive, fight our rising thetan levels, let's say, that you can do any of these things, that you can join a crazy religion and still survive, that you can believe nonsense and still survive, maybe not well, maybe not like idealistically or as pertains to one's natural instincts, but it can happen, right? When people are depotentiated, when people are weakened, they look for easy answers, and that's what Jung is talking about, men turning to the state for their answers. But before they even do that, there has to be a mass of irresponsible people who increasingly sell out their power to the state. So is these basically saying, as the subversive elements in modern society, protected by our own goodwill, hide behind it to further attack society, to put forth other ideas and ideals, right? You have wars within society and wars without. It's reflective of what he said of his time of splitting the Iron Curtain. In our modern times, you guys probably don't want to hear this, but I'd say that Americans been in a cold civil war for years now. He has precedent in Thucydides when he talks about when a society's values, when their language basically completely splits and inverts itself, that's when you know it's happened. That's literally a civil war. When the once values that people could at least look each other in the eyes and nod upon, when suddenly they're saying, nope, not going to agree, we're going to disagree. It's like, that's the fight. And it begins there, with people who formerly knew each other. It begins with estrangement first. You have to estrange each other first before you can attack the body. Before the body is attacked, it begins with the mind generally. With animals, it's generally reactive. There's not much thought, thus we forgive them, right? No one actually gets mad, well, unless they're insane, no one gets mad at a predator of any type eating its prey. So the only ones they get mad about are man. Man's a predator. To pretend like he's not, I know you guys want to pretend like that's not the case, but again, remember I said America creates all sorts of creeps and weirdos and predators. We have so many like hidden elements of not just serial killers, and I think and you can imagine how these types of people have capitalized as our society has gone chaotic and crazy in the last few years. That all the worst criminal elements, all the worst subversive elements, it's just they've had free reign in the chaos. So again, everyone takes for granted that the middle stratum could continually pay for this. And what I think we're about to see is that ability to pay, just not even whether that regardless any of us want to pay, that the ability to pay has run out and will run out. And that's what we see with warfare. That's what we see with estrangement. That's what we see with individuals, groups, and nations that fight. So they're more likely, however, to be slaves of their own fiction. Such one-sidedness is always compensated psychologically by unconscious subversive tendencies. Slavery and rebellion are inseparable correlates. Hence, rivalry for power and exaggerated distrust pervade the entire organism from top to bottom, the entire society organism, he's saying. Furthermore, in order to compensate for its chaotic formlessness, a mass always produces a leader who almost infallibly becomes a victim of his own inflated ego, or her own inflated ego consciousness, as numerous examples in history show, right? And then it all comes crashing down. The cult of personality. And the other element was, we have no reason to take this threat lightly. Everywhere in the West there are submersive minorities, right? And he doesn't mean race, he means ideological elements. It doesn't matter what, right? All those things can be what they may. It's always the ideas, the attack, how the mind is relentlessly attacked and propagandized. These are the things he talks about. And for a crash course, actually I'll read this another day, Orwell's Politics in the English Language. So that's our topic for later. So sheltered by our own humanitarianism and our own sense of justice, hold their incendiary torches ready, with nothing to stop the spread of their ideas except the critical reason of a single fairly intelligent, mentally stable stratum of the population. See, that's quite the assumption, that they exist, that they are any kind of like unified stratum, that they can support anyone but themselves, because in America here, no one supports other people. They support themselves and their family. And then if they have enough resources to give or provide for anyone else, that's super rare. And almost no one does it. And when they do, it's their own pet projects. No one just gives to say, here, there's people hurting here. Bleh. Almost nobody does that, though we have a tendency to do that. If it's our guilty conscience, the gifts don't mean shit, right? Right now, there are countless homeless people on the streets, and I see and know how they're treated. They're treated like they're treated like they were Americans or they are Americans, but they're treated as if they were human beings, and now they're something else. Americans just step right over them, step right by. They also exploit them on social media. They also exploit them in politics, right? These people, they're just tools, is what they are. But at the end of the day, what they are is, well, they are Americans. They are human beings. Yet again, this everyone looks at them and treats them as if they're subhuman. You talk to them, some of them. I used to be a business owner. Lots of them used to be married, have homes, have this and that. Crazy. Um, Mentally stable stratum of the population, one should not, however, overestimate the thickness of the stratum. It varies from country to country in accordance with national temperament. Also, it is regionally dependent on public education and is subject to influence of acutely disturbing factors of a political and economic nature. Right? Nothing is pure. Nothing can just be. Everything exists in context of the zeitgeist and within the zeitgeist. Excuse me there. And that's what we're going to get into next. He discusses the psychic condition and the societal condition and tyranny and paranoia and the dangers of the nation state. But this is why he's, with all this developing pathology and the increasing interest in psychology, Jung goes on to write, thus it is the doctor is summoned willy-nilly to appear on the world stage, and questions are addressed to him which primarily concern the most intimate and hidden life of the individual, and you can see this on social media right now, but which in the last analysis are the direct effects of the zeitgeist, right? Human beings don't exist in a vacuum, right? No one here is free of the context in which they exist. If sit there and you go, hey, how's the water today, ladies and gentlemen? And the fish look at each other and say, what water? What's water? Right? That's exactly how this works. And I borrowed that from David Foster Wallace, but it illustrates it clearly. You could say all the deer hiding in the grass. And you go, hey, deer, how do you like the grass? And they go, what grass? And you go, yeah, you can't even see where you're hiding, but I promise you those above you can see exactly where, what, and who you are. So he's talking about neuroses breaking out and these infantile wish fantasies according poorly with reality. And what he says about the straw man, the last man, the mass man, the psychologically conditioned man to live as a modern Western consumer who has no volition of his own and who's directed by large masses to vote and consume in certain patterns and ways of life. Jung goes on to criticize basically the modern psychology, the modern man. The infantile state of the mass man and mass woman is so unrealistic that they never think to ask, who is paying for this paradise? So let me ask again, who is paying for this paradise? American men know who's paying for this paradise. We're paying for this paradise. It's not a paradise. It's not free. And the money and the goodwill have run out. We're just waiting for the reality to snap back. The infantile dream state of the mass man and woman is so unrealistic, it never thinks to ask who is paying for this paradise. The balancing of accounts is left to a higher political or social authority which welcomes the task. Right? Check it out. Right? You don't see Big Brother. Exactly. Real power is invisible. Thus saith Frodo in Plato's Lord of the Rings. The infantile dream state, the balancing of accounts is left to higher authority, which welcomes the task, for its power is thereby increased, and the more power it has, the weaker and more helpless the individual becomes. Never before in all of human history has the individual human being, and even small groups of them, and even whole communities of them, never in all history have these things been so weak, so destroyed, so attacked, so demoralized, and again, the earth has been not just burned, but salted. Right? They didn't just take the fields, they then salted the fields because they wanted to make sure it couldn't be tampered with. So anyway, it's quite funny how that works. And then you see how from there instinct is healthy and not blind, yet the rest of it blindly plays out. So wherever social conditions of this type develop on a large scale, the road to tyranny lies open and the freedom of the individual turns into spiritual and physical slavery. Since every tyranny is ipso facto immoral and ruthless, it is much more the freedom in the choice of its methods than an institution which still takes account of the individual. Should such an institution come into conflict with the organized state, it is soon made aware of the very real disadvantage of its morality, and therefore feels compelled to avail itself of the same methods as its opponent. Right? You have to compete. That's what that's called. That's the evolutionary arms race. That's what he's saying. In this way, the evil spreads. See, and you can call it evil, but it's just this is what people do. Like when these are the conditions, when people appear, when people gather around each other, when things happen, when people exist of their own accord, right? It's not relegated to what other people think of it. Okay, so he kind of goes on here, but this is where I think he's right. In this way, the evil spreads almost of necessity, even when direct infection might be avoided. The danger of infection is greater where decisive importance is attached to large numbers and statistical values, as is everywhere the case in our Western world. The suffocating power of the masses is paraded before our eyes in one form or another every day in the newspapers, and now I'll add social media and everywhere else. And this insignificance of the individual is rubbed into him so thoroughly that he loses all hope of making himself heard. And now you guys repeat it over and over again. Cut it out. For any American who can pull their head out of their ass, all this doom and gloom, all this bullshit, cut it out. Get it out of the market, get it out of our business, get it out of our lives. It doesn't belong where people are still healthy and active. Yes, if people want to go lay in a corner and die, they can do that. If people want to go lay in a corner and wait for someone to come along and take care of them and feed them, maybe that'll happen. But everyone else who doesn't want to wait for that chance, we continue to do what we need to do. We do what makes us happy. So anyway, let me keep going. So it's rubbed in, right? And just so you know, again, yesterday, I wasn't meaning to do that. I was pointing out how bad it is. And I was hoping that at the very least, maybe people would feel some contempt for the Western model and themselves even. That's okay to feel self-contempt. And it's not okay that anyone has robbed Americans of their ability to feel self-contempt if they aren't happy with themselves and how they've been conditioned and how a lot of our systems work here. Self-contempt is perfectly okay. So like, I'm not talking morbid reflection. That's not what I mean. The outworn ideals of liberty and freedom can't help at all. He can direct this appeal only to his executioners, the spokesmen of the masses. Resistance to the organized mass can be effected only by the man who is as well organized in his individuality as the mass itself. I fully realize this proposition must sound well nigh unintelligible to the man of today. God, and impossible. He's asking for a Superman is what he's asking for. So I have one more thing to read here. 2 more things. 3 more things. We'll see. So, as the dialectical discussion proceeds, a point is reached where an evaluation of these individual impulses becomes necessary, right? Both pathology and instinct, healthy and otherwise. By that time, the patient should have acquired enough certainty of judgment to enable him to act on his own insight and decision, and not from the mere wish to copy convention, right? Talking to you, individual, even if he happens to agree with collective opinion, right? That's fine. That's fine if objectively some of what we do is right and good. I, as both image consultant, individual, person who lives here and works with Americans every day and other people from other cultures too, I have no problem going, hey, where we meet in the middle, where we maintain some sort of group affect, like some positive feeling towards each other, I'm fine with the work there. Unless he stands firmly on his own 2 feet. So, right, even if you agree with collective opinion, unless he stands firmly on his own 2 feet, the so-called objective values profit him nothing, right? Since they then only serve as a substitute for character and so help to suppress his individuality. A wise man once said, public opinion is private laziness, because you can agree in public and then hide behind everyone's back or hold different opinions, right? The point is you're being lazy, you're not being honest, you're not being thorough, there's so much to it. Naturally, society has an indisputable right to protect itself against errant subjectivisms, i.e. errant individuals. When he says subjectivism, he means their individual values, their self-created values. But the fatally short-sighted habit of our age is to think only in terms of large numbers of mass organizations, right, and large sums of money, of which almost no American has, right? So basically, again, all been sold in abstract, been bought in abstract, removed from the physicality and the body and the daily reality and the primal reality of life, and sold a cheap, watered-down, manufactured factory farm image. So society has a right to protect itself from individuals. Is completely at the mercy of ruthless individualists. Let it band together into groups and organizations as much as it likes. It is just this banding together and the resultant extinction of the individual personality that makes it succumb so readily to a dictator. A million zeros joined together do not, unfortunately, add up to one. Ultimately, everything depends on the quality of the individual, but the fatally short-sighted habit of our age is to think only in terms of large numbers and mass organizations. The one would think that the world had seen more than enough of what a well-disciplined mob can do in the hands of a single madman, or a whole history of madmen and crazy people, and people who assumed all sorts of shit, and all sorts of creeps and weirdos and predators, right? Like, that we want to sit here and pretend that modern man is domesticated, or that he's fully innocent, or that any of these other things, right? We generally defer conflict but not judgment. So when we discuss these things, the qualities of the individuals, the actions they do and don't take matter. These are the things that have merit, right? So there's one final thought here, and it is on this kind of nature, right? You know, a million zeros never add up to one. The procession, right? It begins to state slavery. Seen from this standpoint, the individual really is of diminishing importance, and anyone who wished to dispute this would soon find himself at a loss for arguments. The fact that the individual feels himself, or the numbers of his family, or the esteemed friends in his circle to be important merely underlies the slightly cosmic subjectivity of his feeling. For what are the few compared to 10,000 or 100,000, or let alone a million, or 8 billion? This recalls the argument of a thoughtful friend with whom I once got caught up in a huge crowd of people. Suddenly he exclaimed, "Here you have the most convincing reason for not believing in immortality. All those people want to be immortal." Right? All the what? Everybody. From the lowest form of life to the highest form of life. It seems like everything just wants to live forever. The bigger the crowd, the more negligible the individual becomes. But if the individual, overwhelmed by the sense of his own puniness and impotence, should feel that his life has lost its meaning, which after all is not identical with public welfare and higher standards of living, well, we saw that peak, but that has had its time, right? Then he is already on the road to state slavery, and without knowing or wanting it, has become its proselyte, right? This is what, we've already covered this in other people, saying, look, Sinclair Lewis said, right? These people champion their own subjugation, their own uh, ineffectuality. The man who looks only outside and quails before the big battalions has no resources with which to combat the evidence of his senses and his reason, right? People feel hopeless. The individual feels lost. But that is just what is happening today. We are all fascinated and overawed by statistical truths in large numbers and are daily appraised of the nullity and futility of the individual personality. Right? Give up. Resistance is futile. Hello, fellow human being. Hello, depotentiated unit. Insert social security number. Insert credit card. Have a nice day. See, I think actually in the history of human invention, given all the slavery and violence and warfare, service with a smile, customer service, those are actually kind of good ideas. Beats the alternative. Most people, when they're subject to the alternative, and the alternative is not pretty, conversely, those personages who strut about on the world stage and whose voices are heard far and wide seem to the uncritical public to be borne along on some mass movement or on the tide of public opinion, and for this reason are either applauded or execrated. It's a bit too smart of a word, Jung. Let's just go demonized, scapegoated. Since mass suggestion plays a predominant role here, it remains a moot point whether their message is their own, for which they are personally responsible, or whether they merely function as a megaphone for collective opinion. Let's change that word. A mouthpiece, right? Just do any modern leaders, I think this is why our former president got so much crap, because he had far too much of his own personality and character. They go, no, shut up, just be the robot, be the hello party, I will vote along these lines, right? This is what they expect, this is what they want. So, you can see these things play out in American public and dynamics. So, under these circumstances, it's a small wonder that individual judgment grows increasingly uncertain of itself, or just completely stupid. And like I said, there's healthy instincts in the individual American's judgment, but when it's been formed and shaped by a factory farm school model for 100 years now, their judgment grows uncertain of itself, and that responsibility is collectivized as much as possible, i.e., is shuffled off by the individual and delegated to a corporate body. The corporation state, the largest, most powerful, destructive force to individuals and groups and humanity as a whole, the most dangerous threat to humanity to ever exist, and it's just like the most basic daily fact of our existence, and that it owns everyone and everything. Anyway, in this way, the individual becomes more and more of a function of society, which in turn usurps the function of the real life carrier, right, the individual, whereas in actual fact, society is nothing more than an abstract idea like the state or the corporation state. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean Big Brother isn't there, right? So both are hypostatized, that is, have become autonomous, right? And it even runs itself. The state in particular is turned into a quasi-animate personality from whom everything is expected. In reality, is only a camouflage for those individuals who know how to manipulate it. Thus, the constitutional state drifts into the situation of a primitive form of society, namely the communism of primitive tribe, which everybody is subject to the autocratic rule of a chief or an oligarchy. So that is its more worst case scenario. In a country like America, it's much more tame. It's much more like, tiny American flags for some, abortions for others, have your cake and eat it too. But these things inevitably meet their end. Like nothing, like someone is paying for all this. The free ride doesn't go on forever. So to get to the end of my point here, when I mentioned that Jung talks about the whole situation from the psychological perspective of the evolved organism who has both an instinctual image, right? Like insects follow the sun and the moon, for instance. This is why they bump into lights and why you see insects and bugs always getting stuck and dying on lights, because they evolved. It turns out it works to navigate by sun and moon, but then you're kind of screwed when it turns out. But luckily, your mating strategy was to put forth millions and billions of babies, so you kind of make for up what you lack in individual intelligence, you can make up for in numbers. And just like what insects are to the depotentiated mass man of the what the insect is the depotentiated individual of the state. Yet that healthy vision of the cactus, of the flower, of the world exists in the individual human psyche, just like the moth. Whether they get off track of what those guiding principles and instincts are is another matter. So why this is so frustrating in the West, why we've been so frustrated individually and collectively, is because our highest arts, our highest values, everything has been stolen, robbed, salted, cloned, repeated, sold out. And our highest arts mean that everything means nothing, that everything has been taken, that everything valuable that you could be derived but thereby is largely already accumulated in a few hands, and they didn't think to leave any more golden eggs. Crazy to say, here's the goose that lays the golden eggs. You know what? We had our time. It had its time. Let's go ahead and chop the head. And Jim Rohn, former businessman, he used to warn about this. If you have the goose that lays the golden eggs, don't chop its head off, right? You keep letting it lay eggs, right? It's why a hen is more valuable than a rooster, both to the corporation state and in a farm or a factory farm, because they're the egg layers. But basically, there's a song by Sturgill Simpson. I'm going to relate it back to the American bard here, I guess. Sturgill Simpson, Voices. When I say that our highest instincts and principles and values and arts have all been attacked and robbed and stolen and watered down and sold out, this is what I mean. The song goes, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to wrap it up, and I'll say in advance here, thank you for your time. I appreciate your attention. Sturgill Simpson says, there's a voice that I can hear sometimes out here on the mountain. When it's dark in the sky, it's pouring acid like a fountain. And the memories like coal dust stain the window of my eyes. So ask them no more questions, they can't sell you no more lies. I hear the voices all around me in society's depression. Over and over they recite their first impression. The rivers are all crying, but the ocean cannot speak until her waters crash into uncharted shores so dark and bleak. And here's the crux. How I wish somebody'd make these voices go away. Seems like they're always talking, but they ain't got much to say. A picture's worth 1,000 words, but a word ain't worth a dime. And we all know they'll go on talking till the end of time. And he does say, don't call it a sign of the times. It's always been this way. Anyway, thanks for your time. I wish you the best. Tune in for more, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks.